My apologies, Rob, for not being here to meet you. I was picking up some milk. The young fellow, he drinks it by the gallon. But I see Linda's got you settled into your accustomed spot, if you can call it that, after an absence of 3 years. If I remember right, you said we'd be getting together soon. I tried to find you, but no luck.
I'm a man of my word. When compared to the last gap of 30 some odd years, what's a 3 year absence? A mere bagatelle. Nothing to speak of. After our last visit, I decided it was about time I saw more of Canada. I discovered a ready market for my talents, limited though they may be, entertaining the old folks in the retirement home circuit. Canada's a big country, and I'm no longer up to hauling my stuff from one bus to another. So I bought the cheapest used car I could find, filled it full of inexpensive musical equipment. Away I went. I earned enough to make it to the next town, and to the next. The car finally packed it in not far from here. What better time to pay a return visit? Last time I think I said something about the recollections flowing. Well, they've kept coming. If my experience is typical, there's something to the claim that memories of days long gone become more vivid as we grow older, unlike the short-term memory. My days in Africa, for example. Do you have time for this?
Until you tire. You know I love this stuff.
I was still young when I traveled through East Africa. On foot, some of the time. Keeping mostly to areas in and around the Mara and the Serengeti grasslands, with the occasional excursion to the coast. You remember, after finishing with school, I spent time in the north, living in the bush, sharing ground with the animals. I learned something of their habits, enough at any rate to feel comfortable sharing their territory. I looked at the East African plain in much the same way. Replace the forest with long grass, throw in a hotter, drier climate, populate the countryside with large game of a different sort. There you have it. Now, the original peoples, in making do with basic weapons, adapted to both places. I guess that the animals and the tribes people maintained a healthy respect for each other and kept mostly to themselves. I was counting on it. Not that I didn't have the odd close encounter. One time I didn't get around to pitching camp until late sunset. I woke in the morning to find a pride of lions no more than a few feet away. Another time it was cheetah. Both times the animals were completely disinterested. I walked away without incident, so they must have thought me harmless. They would have had that right. I was a pretty sorry specimen at the best of times. When traveling through the bush, I was sorrier still. I don't know. It's possible their sense of smell wasn't primed. Maybe it was just good fortune. In a way, though, their indifference was too pronounced. There I was, within close range, and all these big cats would do was yawn, look elsewhere for something worth worrying about, or flop over. Take a nap. There was no shortage of food. Both times I'd seen sizable herds nearby. Gazelle, impala, wildebeest, carrion feeders, hyenas in particular, were also abundant and well fed. I did have a weapon handy, a Gurkha kukri, a gift given to me when I was living in Nepal. The Gurkhas gave me a few pointers on its use. It's a very formidable weapon, particularly in confined spaces. If I had been attacked, I wouldn't have gone down without a struggle. I have it with me. Would you like to see?
Sure.
When we were last together, I remember mentioning the goats, feeding off thorn bushes. I saw a small animal foraging in thorn trees in East Africa, a hyrax. Its ability to move among the thorns without getting punctured was entertaining enough. But what's even more remarkable is its lineage. It's said to be the nearest living relative of the elephant. Other animals, zoo favorites, were wandering about, sometimes keeping to their own kind, sometimes intermingling with one another. Giraffes, especially graceful when loping across the plains, almost as though they were running in slow motion. Hippos, mostly keeping to the water, occasionally lumbering through the grasslands on those stocky, powerful legs of theirs. Zebras, sometimes motionless, except for the constantly twitching tail, working to keep the insects at a distance, I guess. Ostrich, hartebeest, eland, oryx, topies. We routinely see topies standing on little mounds of earth. I've no idea why. A better view, perhaps. Elephants. Exotic birds. Warthogs, rolling around in the mud, enjoying themselves no end. Wild donkeys, they were out there too. When I went to the coast, I'd get to know the fishermen and the groundskeepers. You know, people quite rightly talk of gorgeous sunsets, but I think sunrises have a special charm. Most people don't rise with the sun, so most people don't see them. Fishermen, though, they set out at sunrise, returning a few hours later with their catch. The groundsmen were practiced at scaling coconut trees, cutting the nut from the tree, slicing and topping the husk. They were good company, and you can do worse than roast fish washed down with coconut water. Coconuts. Harvesting coconuts. In parts of Southeast Asia, they use monkeys for this work. Someone at some point must have decided to harness the monkey's natural skills as a gatherer. He moves easily through the trees. He uses his limbs and teeth as tools. Train a monkey to focus these skills, these tools, on harvesting coconuts, and you've got yourself a productive employee. One that literally works for peanuts. The employer kept them roped, so the transition to self-employment was not an option. The Asian elephant can also be trained, and train them they do, as transport, as forestry workers, and of course, as entertainers. Spending time with a snake and elephant show, I learned that the pachyderms were given names, usually to match some personality trait or a distinctive marking. The name given to one of the elephants seemed to be a variant on Puss in Boots. He was affectionately known as Shit and Piss. More often than not, he had an irrepressible urge to urinate and defecate while dancing. And he invariably did both without breaking stride. Showbiz in his blood, I guess. And judging from the performance of the little one, the tradition wasn't about to die with Papa. And the snake side of it. You remember the Indian street entertainers and the taste of danger they included in their acts. Thai snake handlers are no different. Cobras and other poisonous varieties are among the snakes that they handle. You know how it is with entertainment. Timing is everything. Given an opportunity, the snake would have been more than happy to take a chunk out of the handler. The closest they came when I was watching was when one of the snakes caught hold of a headband, liberating it from the handler's head. A handler would kiss the underside of a snake's head while holding it in midair, or gingerly place the snake's head inside his mouth. All done with impeccable timing. At the end of the show, they'd milk the venom from a cobra or two to demonstrate that the snakes were intact and very dangerous. As a diversion, one of them might place scorpions and centipedes on his face, an act of absurd bravado. You could see that he'd been repeatedly stung and bitten, maybe on purpose, to build up immunity. In that sort of work, immunity would be helpful. It's funny, the way the memory works. Even as I was describing the dancing elephant, another defecating animal came to mind. A camel this time. And this memory takes me some considerable distance from the jungles of Southeast Asia to Cappadocia, or Cappadocia. The locals call it Cappadocia in Turkey. Even if its history weren't particularly notable, this region would be remarkable for its distinctive landscape. Wind and rain have shaped the volcanic rock into unusual formations, some of which have been given the fanciful name of fairy chimneys. To me, some of these chimneys look more like giant mushrooms. An equally fanciful image, I guess. You see lots of conical formations as well. Its history is notable, dating back some 5,000 years. Hittites, Persians, and Macedonians all passed through. But what's most fascinating, at least to me, is the region's connection with early Christianity. After leaving Jerusalem, Paul and his followers established a colony in Cappadocia. The soft volcanic rock offered a troglodyte hideaway, ideal for the monastic life. There were cave dwellings, underground cities built by previous inhabitants, retreats where the Christians could hide from unfriendly outsiders for months at a time. They built on what they found, adding churches, monasteries and convents, even generating a saint or two. Although some of the cave dwellings are still occupied, most are abandoned, but still serviceable for a traveling man with limited assets. And clearly much safer than some of the wooden houses I saw in Istanbul. It wasn't clear what was keeping them up. They looked as though they'd collapse with a bit of a shove. I've wondered since if they survived the recent earthquake. You know, the big one that hit Turkey at the end of the last century. Speaking of safety, I remember a close call, a very close call, after rummaging through the ruins of Termessos, an ancient redoubt nestled in the Taurus Mountains. Anyways, after leaving the place, I slipped on a steep path which ran along a ledge, breaking my roll just at the point where I would have tumbled over the edge. After recovering my composure, I cautiously investigated. I would not have survived the drop. A location to discourage invasion, for sure. I found out afterwards that Alexander the Great found it impregnable. After unsuccessfully attempting to add the city to his trophies, he compared it to an eagle's nest. I guess the inhabitants eventually decided that the trade-off, sacrificing convenience for security, was too much of a hassle. After a gradual decline, Termessos was abandoned in the 5th century AD. Back to Cappadocia. At the risk of appearing fixated on feces, I have to mention what struck me as a novel method of fertilizing crops, as well as ensuring a ready food supply of another sort. Pigeon houses, thousands of them, carved into the soft rock. Despite the advent of chemical fertilizers, lofts are still maintained by some farmers. Cappadocian fruits are reputed to be the sweetest and juiciest in Turkey, and local farmers claim that this justly deserved reputation can be attributed to pigeon shit, that it's entirely due to pigeon shit. Having sampled some of the local produce, they just might be onto something. There were lots of troglodyte dwellings, pigeon houses in the Lara Valley. And shepherds too. The sheep would scamper down the valley cliffs to drink from the Melendez River. If you felt like a nap, you could likely go to sleep pounding. And another thing about the landscape, wind and water did not conspire to form fairy chimneys alone. If you gave your imagination free rein, you could see other shapes too. By way of example, I remember seeing one particular outcropping as a camel. You could play the same game in caves, like the ones I came across in Borneo. The caves there are among the largest in the world, all the better to play in. Well, they offered respite from the tropical heat during the day and shelter at night. If you chose your resting place carefully, you'd have nothing to fear, except the insects, the bats, maybe the odd snake. Turn off the flashlight or douse your torch if that's what you had, and you could see nothing, but you could still feel the insects and smell the guano, the bat excrement. It was everywhere. You'd slip and slide on it. Anyway, I remember waking one morning to the giant profile of an old man's face. On another, it was what looked to be a profile of Abe Lincoln. As a child, I loved to imagine bedroom shadows as all sorts of strange and sometimes familiar shapes. Clouds too. Same thing here, I guess. Did I mention the bats? They would be out in the jungle most of the night, foraging for insects. First, though, they'd gather close to the mouth of the cave. And then, just before sunset, they'd fly off, like a river flowing through the sky. Millions of them. No wonder the night jungle is a loud, constant cacophony of sound. The insects have good reason to scream. To the Panan tribespeople, the river is a highway. Longhouses are built close to the shore. Often next to a gorgeous mountain backdrop. While the adults are off hunting and gathering, the young ones keep busy on the stoop, basket weaving mainly. Even the toddlers are put to work, stripping cane for the weavers. The farther you traveled into the hinterland, the more likely you'd come across birds of paradise. And the orangutan. I remember one particularly misty morning when I saw some. Using vertical branches and vines to get around. Perched close to the top, the orangutan would go backwards and forwards, building momentum, increasing the length of the arc with each cycle. Eventually, he'd reach the liana, use it to climb down to another branch, and then he'd use that branch to reach a tree, and so on, and so on, making his way through the jungle without touching the ground. Maybe it was the protective cover of the mist, but they completely focused on the next stage of the journey, totally ignoring me. While some caves offer ideal housing for bats, others provide shelter for thousands of sea swallows, birds whose gelatinous nests are harvested for that great culinary delicacy, bird's nest soup. The nests are usually located in the highest, deepest recesses of the cave. Accessing them is difficult, dangerous work. But as long as demand is strong, prices remain high, the precarious work will continue. The nests will be harvested. Using the caves to escape the heat. It reminds me of the stepwells of Gujarat in India. These wells are immense, with colonnades and galleries on several levels. Intricate carvings, and a variety of elaborate ornamentation. It struck me as ostentatious display gone mad, until I came across a cot and a baby's cradle, complete with bedding, towards the bottom end of one of them. Both were enveloped with a thick layer of dust, so I knew they hadn't been used recently. There had been a time, though, when this well had also served as alternative hot weather accommodation for the resident Maharaja. It was substantially cooler than the 45 degrees Celsius ground level temperature. For old-timers like us, who are more comfortable with the conversion, that's over 110 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface. I suppose Gujarati royal families weren't about to get away from the heat by immersing themselves in simple tube wells. They wanted fitting accommodation for a prince, not just a supply of potable water that doubled as an air conditioner. An almost religious deference to copulation can be found throughout much of Southeast Asia. On one of the Thai islands, for example, the locals urge you to see what they call grandfather and grandmother rocks, coastal rocks which resemble the male and female genitalia. As legend would have it, The rocks were formed from the bodies of an old couple whose boat was destroyed in rough seas. The only parts of the bodies in view, though, are the genitals. While the rock representing the male organ was unique and easily identifiable, large crevices were everywhere, and I had no clear idea which one was Grandma. Anyway, the whereabouts of the rest of the old couple is anybody's guess. Who cares? Seems to capture the local attitude. In India, they have lingams and yonis, stylized sculptures representing the male and female genitalia. Taking it a step or two further, there are some Indian temples which celebrate copulation in highly imaginative variety. The Khajuraho temples are said to have been built about 1,000 years ago by the Chandela Rajputs. Why they were built is a matter of speculation. Some say to portray the emptiness of human desire. Others, the exact opposite, that the temples detail the gratification of human desire as an important step on the journey towards absolute fulfillment, bliss, towards nirvana. Still others say that the temples were intended to encourage procreation, that there was a serious shortfall in the population that needed rectifying. Since there are no records, only legends, you're free to take your pick. The origins of the erotic art of the Sun Temple at Konark in Orissa are equally mysterious. Just as with Khajuraho, some believe that the erotic art of the 13th century temple was intended to stimulate procreation. There had been significant military reversals, apparently. The army needed replenishing. Perhaps there's something to this because what remains of the temple takes the form of a giant chariot, a military juggernaut of sorts. Unlike Khajuraho, much of the erotic artwork is noticeably disfigured. Some of the more egregious examples, though, they're in pretty good shape. You find them tucked away, here and there, more or less intact. Talking of bliss, I came pretty close myself. Watching the rice planting on an Indonesian island during the wet season. The workers wore wide-brimmed conical hats to protect them from the sun. They'd pick up evenly spaced bundles of rice plants, remove the plants one by one, thrusting them under the water and into the ground. At the same time, there'd be hoeing and plowmen guiding water buffalo, yoked to wooden plows, churning a swath through the mud, cutting up the ground underneath. You remember the Rajasthani farmer riding a harrow, the one that was powered by a camel. Rice farmers in this place used a similar tool. Only this time, the harrow was harnessed to water buffalo, and it did its work underwater. I'd sit and watch for hours, especially when I was looking for respite. For a touch of tranquility. Lakota. As I was saying, it was the wet season, and the rains were heavy, sometimes very heavy. But the downpours didn't last long. Once the first drops fell, I'd quickly make my way to the nearest cover, head down, looking up only to mark the path. More often than not, the rush was pointless. The rain would be heavy within seconds, and I'd usually be soaking wet by the time I made it to shelter. I remember one time, though, when I looked up, just as I was about to run into the largest spider web I had ever seen. Quickly changing direction, I skirted the web and took shelter in a nearby restaurant. When I caught my breath, I took a more leisurely look. Even through the heavy rain, I could see that the web was upwards of 30 feet wide, and that it was spotted with large black blobs. Once the rain died down, I could see that the blobs were spiders, the largest I had ever seen. These spiders were clearly visible from 30 feet away. I have no idea what would have happened if I hadn't stopped in time, but I doubt they would have been pleased if I'd mangled their web. I came across this one island with an interesting economic structure. It had villages grouped according to the particular crafts they practiced. The crafts included cloth dyeing, basket making, weaving, blacksmithing. All still using age-old methods, handed down through the generations. And there were potters too, working this craft in ways I hadn't seen anyplace else. They did not use machines, not even a wheel. The handcrafted pot is baked in an open oven, fired with coconut husks and wood. Once the fire's hot enough, rice husks and straw are added, generating a thick ash covering which holds in the heat. While the pot's still hot, fine ash can be added for coloring. If a dark red color is wanted, extract of tamarind seed is used. The techniques used today date back hundreds of years. They looked ancient. The village felt ancient. I was told, it felt true, that this is the only place on earth where pots are still made and fired in this way. Maybe the look of the place was highlighted by this one child, an albino, strikingly white among the dusky bodies and oven fires, raising an arm to shield his sensitive eyes from the sun. He was usually found in the protective arms of a sister. As far as I could see, was treated no differently from the rest of the village kids. A child like that is bound to be memorable. Others, though, adults whose paths you cross for just a few minutes, they can stick with you too. Especially if they seem a little incongruous. Like this French Canadian. I was enjoying a beer on an Indonesian island when this countryman happened along. Visitors sitting at the next table, a couple and their 2 young kids, started talking with him. Eventually he joined them. He told them he was keeping body and soul together in 2 ways. Through the generosity of the islanders and by crafting jewelry, mainly bracelets. He showed them a bracelet that was just about finished, except for the clasp. A price was agreed.
Yeah, yeah, no problem.
Oh, tidak apa-apa.
Ya, tidak apa-apa.
Bagus.
And right there, he took measurements, cut the bracelet to size, and added the clasp. He had recently, very recently, been dining on magic mushrooms, and the results were evident.
Too many.
Yeah.
All the time, every day, magic mushroom is very good. No problem. So, yay. No problem. I make another mistake.
I'll always remember the look on the children's faces as he worked and talked. Pure delight. During our last get-together, when I focused on India and Pakistan, I mentioned the shanty towns that grew up around construction projects. You'd see the same thing in Southeast Asia, particularly around the resort islands, towns. When I was running short of money, I'd clean myself up and make the rounds. Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, they have resorts aplenty, and work wasn't that hard to find. And my fees were very reasonable. And again, there was a certain novelty value, a kind of cachet to having a Western entertainer on staff. Even if he was relegated to providing background music for the outdoor buffet. Anyway, some of these places were very luxurious, and they charged accordingly. Not a whole lot of this revenue made its way into the hands of the staff. Local recruits mainly, toiling long and hard to keep the visitors happy. If any of the guests strayed beyond the confines of the resort, it was usually to shop in one of the adjacent towns, purpose-built for their comfort. If they'd walked beyond the boundaries of the resort, just a little way, not at all far really, they would have seen another kind of place. The kind of place that provided a ready supply of cheap labor. Those that were hired on, they considered themselves lucky. Weighed against the alternatives, work in the resorts won hands down. West and East. You know Kipling's comment about East and West and never the twain meeting? I guess that's normally interpreted as more of a statement about differences, not similarities. To me, though, it seems that he's saying that there's no clear demarcation between the two, that they blend together at the geographical boundaries. And don't let me start on boundaries, borders. They have to rank pretty high among humanity's most artificial and least considered constructs. Anyway, over the centuries, there have been significant movements of peoples to and fro across the boundaries of Europe and Asia. I'm struck by the similarities in the music, for one thing. You don't have to be an expert in linguistics or in cultural habits or customs. Any kind of expert at all. You just have to listen. There's clearly some kind of thread connecting the Pakistani singer, the one I heard singing a cappella, with singers and musicians in Turkey and Hungary.
अथरू बने कतारा अथरू बने कतारा जदों याद आ गयो अथरू बने कतारा जदों याद आ गयो वेले किवें विसारा जदों याद आ गयो वेले किवें विसारा जदों याद आ गयो अज तां हनेरे सारी तारे लुका ले अज तां हनेरे सारी तारे लुका ले पलकां बिछावां ने बिछावां मैं की करां पलकां बिछावां ने बिछावां मैं की करां वाटां च फेर खबरेओ किधरों दी आ जावे वाटां च फेर खबरेओ किधरों दी आ जावे सारा शरीर अखियां बनावां मैं की करां
Hiç aklımdan çıkmıyor ki kapılıp sere gittim aman Ayşem mor menevşem dağlar başı duman Ayşem İndim ürgüp çöllerine geleceğin güman Çaremin derdi İstanbul sokakları onu benden siz
Boldogságos Szücs Miska, csak a szárát fordítsd vissza.
There are some practices, though, that bear little resemblance from east to west. Driving habits, for sure. When I look back, I'm struck by how quickly I made the adjustment to the veritable chaos of the roads of South Asia. When we were last together, I mentioned that I took the bus from time to time. Well, despite my sorry appearance, I could still be identified as a Westerner. And maybe some of the drivers thought that that would put me at a serious disadvantage, that my delicate Western constitution could not handle the vicious competition for space. They'd insist that I ride up front in the wide open spaces of the driver's cabin. There was a downside, though. The horrors of the road would strike me full face. Vehicles would straddle the center, try to keep to the middle of the road for maximum flexibility. Depending on the flow of oncoming traffic, they wanted to be able to move to the right or to the left as circumstances demanded. They saw it as giving them their best shot to avoid accidents, to make headway. And the horns. The honking horn meant just one thing. Get out of my way, I'm coming through. You'd have pedestrians, livestock, horse-drawn carriages, lots of bicycles and trucks, rickshaws, scooters, cars, buses, all vigorously competing for limited road space. look back on it, it was a bit of a trade-off. I got the relative comfort of the driver's cabin, but my nervous system sure took a beating. Oh, you hear talk of aggressive drivers here in Canada? No contest. And then, there's the eastern version of the Western Wishing Well. Apart from Aladdin's lamp, a couple of examples come to mind. First, the Weeping Column of the Hagia Sophia Museum in Istanbul. The Hagia Sophia started as a Christian church built by Emperor Constantius in the 4th century. After being destroyed twice over, Emperor Justinian decided to build what would become the most magnificent church of its time, with the largest enclosed space in the world, a record that would last for about 1,000 years. In the 1400s, with the coming of the Ottomans, it was converted to a mosque, then to a museum. Anyways, there's this weeping column with a well-worn hole about shoulder height. If you twist your thumb around in the hole and it emerges damp, you get your wish. Second, there's the rust-free iron pillar of New Delhi. It stands about 20 feet high, and it's said to be about 1,500 years old. Here's the deal. If, with your back to the pillar, you can encircle the pillar with your arms and join your hands, then you get your wish. When I was there, the enthusiasm to succeed was so intense that well-wishers would be pulling the supplicant's arms. Since they usually stop short of dislocating joints, it didn't get them much mileage. You recall that when I first came to Europe, I spent some time with gypsies. Most of that time was spent in Hungary, a land steeped in folk traditions. Music and dancing were front and center. While I'm out of touch with what's happening currently, in those days there were many government-sponsored cultural events, free to the public. I knew some of the performers, and at their invitation, would tag along to watch. National Day celebrations in the main square of Budapest's Castle District. I happened to strike up a conversation in English with a fellow who was also enjoying the entertainment. After some time, he invited me to come meet his family. Although grateful, I demurred. I told him that some of my friends were among the entertainers, that I wanted to see them perform. Smiling, he said that he did too, and pointed to a 3-story apartment block adjoining the square. That's where he lived, in the 3rd story. Although the block had no balconies, there were a number of windows facing onto the square. I spent the rest of the day in their apartment, watching the performances in some considerable comfort. My friends were welcome too. Come nightfall, hospitality was extended all round. An unusual occurrence, I guess, but I expect every life has its share. We became close, to the point where I felt perfectly comfortable dropping in unannounced. It was amazing how often there was something going on, either in the square directly below or within easy walking distance. We'd be chatting away, music would be heard, our curiosity would get the best of us, and we'd take a look. If it sounded interesting, but was not in clear view, we'd leave the apartment to check it out. Sometimes there'd be entertainment bordering on the bizarre, a country and western group, a military Dixieland band. Whatever the style of music, the performers were clearly glad to be there. I can't remember a time when the delivery was anything less than enthusiastic. Many of the tunes were familiar. I still remember some of it.
Mikor nincs semmi dolgom, nem várnak a jó barát. A városban sétálok egy magam, mindenhol körülnézek, ismerem az utcakét. Akárhogy, de jól érzem magam. Minden helyen áll egy város, minden sok lakó van, minden olyan kiszámítható. Egy van csak, ahol a falak mellett virág nyílik. Itt lakom, s ez oly megnyugtató.
During one visit, it was a particularly cool day in mid-December, we noticed something going on next to the church, just in front of a fanciful structure called Fisherman's Bastion. Since you'd expect outdoor entertainments to be shut down during the cooler winter months, we didn't give it a whole lot of attention. But when we heard canned music, we took a second look. It turned out they'd been building a basic stage for folk dancers from the hinterland. Down we went for a closer look, and there they were, huddled together in their heavy coats, visibly feeling the effects of the frigid temperatures. I couldn't believe that they were about to shed their outerwear, mount the stage, and cavort about as though it were midsummer. There was a sum total of about half a dozen persons in the audience. But dance they did, blocking out the harsh conditions by sheer force of will, I guess. Some distance into the performance, I noticed that the rest of the audience had moved on, clearly defeated by the cold. That my buddy and I were the only ones left. The performers soldiered on, spirited to the end. I guess vigorous movement was the only vehicle available to them to keep the cold at bay. I think I've already mentioned that the country was steeped in folk traditions. You could see the depth of the involvement in the routine participation of the people, especially the young people. You'd see them dancing in the streets, in their civvies, as it were, whenever and wherever a band happened to be playing. Couples would dance their hearts out, often with competitive playfulness, vying to outdo one another in verve and skill. And skilled they were, clearly indicating that they had received instruction from an early age. costume youngsters on stage, too, dancing with a confidence that seemed to belie their years. musicians I met were part-timers with full-time day jobs. I tagged along with a couple of them once to see the crystal factory where they worked. The place had been built in the 1870s, and it looked as though precious little had been done to it since. Even the look of the workers must have been pretty much the same back then. They'd be milling about among pipes, furnaces, cooling tubs, some toiling without shirts because of the heat. The chaotic look of the place seemed at odds with the refined skills that were at work. Using little more than strategically placed puffs of air and the play of gravity, the glass blowers would take the molten glass and fashion it into various shapes. If they weren't happy with the results, into the discard tub they'd go, presumably for recycling. Without interrupting the flow, smokers would use molten glass to light their cigarettes. One worker specialized in fashioning jug handles. Products emerging from the centrifuge would be dislodged with a confident tap. One thing struck me. Although the machines were necessary, they were far from sufficient. Without the skillful manipulation of the workers, they would have been totally useless. Intricate, detailed etching was the last step. Before the final quality control check. And packing. Another of the musicians was a working ranch hand in the Hungarian Puszta, a vast plain covering much of the country. I came to know his employer and was invited to spend time at the ranch. During their off hours, my friend and his fellow hands loved to don traditional costume and show off their skills. It was impressive to see the complete rapport between horse and rider, the control the riders had over their horses. First, they would exercise the horse with a vigorous gallop. Afterwards, with softly spoken commands, they would bring the horse from a standing position, first to his front knees, and then to a fully prostrate position. While in this position, the horse would happily permit the rider to crack a whip, stand on him, rest against him, or stand astride him. The rider would also bring the horse to a resting position with his front legs extended, haunches against the ground. He would then place himself between the extended legs beneath the trunk of the horse, a show of trust between horse and rider. Some would handle teams of 5 horses, 3 in the front and 2 in the rear. Nothing unusual if the driver were running a lead from a wagon, I suppose. But remarkable if there were no wagon. If the driver were able to control this team while standing on the hindquarters of the 2 rear horses, 1 foot on each haunch. I recall one horseman who could gallop a team from this position. They could always explain the practical significance of these skills. That it wasn't just macho, albeit entertaining, frivolity. I'm not going to gift wrap this one for you, though. Instead, I'm going to leave it to your imagination to guess at the explanations.
My imagination. I never had one of those. It's long since disappeared. Anyways, I have this friend who, when he's ready to leave, he says, "You must be tired. You need to rest." Coming from me, though, it's the straight goods. You have been at it for a long time, and you've got to be tired. It'd be nice, though, if you had a little something left for a tune. What do you say?